YouTube. You might not be able to tell necessarily because we're in a little bit of a different space, but we're doing another reading today of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. We decided to come outside today because it's just beautiful. It's a little overcast, but I think that's better for my sake so that I don't burn or go blind trying to read this book. But just, isn't that beautiful? Oh. But yeah, so we're going underneath the Mediterranean. That's an interesting maneuver, Mr. Nemo, Mr. Captain Nemo. A little, you know, uh, I'm trying to think of good adjectives here that I haven't used for Captain Nemo before, but quite a brazen man. He just kind of does stuff, doesn't he? Like, pass underneath continents. It's fine. You just kind of subduct with the plate. I'm sure it'll go fine. Don't worry about it. It's not like the Mediterranean is, volcanically active. I'm sure they'll fare just fine. Nothing bad will happen. Especially considering this chapter's name is Chapter 5 of Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Mediterranean. Technically, Part 2, Chapter 5. The next day, the 12th of February, at daybreak, the Nautilus went up to the surface of the sea. I rushed up to the platform. About 7 o'clock, Ned and Conseil joined me. These two inseparable companions had slept tranquilly, thinking no more of the Nautilus's feat. "Well, Mr. Naturalist," asked the Canadian in a slightly jeering tone, "what about the Mediterranean?" "We're on its surface, friend Ned." "What?" said Conseil. "Last night?" "Yes, last night itself. In a few minutes, we cleared the insuperable isthmus." In a few minutes? Nemo, where'd you get this thing? Cool whip, I guess. "I don't believe it," said the Canadian. "And you are wrong, Land," I resumed. "The low coast rounding off towards the south is the Egyptian coast." "You won't take me in." Apologies if you can hear the wind. I'll edit this part down just a little bit. "You won't take me in," said the obstinate Canadian. "But it must be true." "But it must be true," said Conseil, "or Monsieur would not say so." Besides, Ned, Captain Nemo did the honors of his tunnel, and I was near him in the helmsman's cage whilst he guided the Nautilus through the narrow passage himself. "You hear, Ned?" said Conseil. "And you have such good eyes," I added. "You, Ned, can see the piers of Port Said stretching out into the sea." The Canadian looked then attentively. "Yep," said he. "You are right, Professor. And your captain is a clever man. We are in the Mediterranean. Good. Well, now let us talk, if you please, about our concerns, but so that no one can hear." I saw very well that the Canadian was coming too. In any case, I thought it better to talk about it, as he desired, and we all three went and sat down near the lantern house, where we were less exposed to be wetted by the spray from the waves. "Now, Ned, we're ready to hear you," said I. "What have you to tell us?" "What have I to tell you is very simple," answered the Canadian. "We are in Europe, and before Captain Nemo's caprice drags us to the bottom of the polar seas, or takes us back to Oceania, I want to leave the Nautilus." I must acknowledge that a discussion with the Canadian on the subject always embarrassed me. I did not wish to trammel the liberty of our companions in any way, and yet I felt no desire to leave Captain Nemo. Thanks to him and his apparatus, I was each day completing my submarine studies, and I was writing my book on submarine depths again in the very midst of its elements. Should I ever again meet with such an opportunity of observing the marvels of the ocean? No, certainly. I could not, therefore, reconcile myself to the idea of leaving the Nautilus before our cycle of investigations was accomplished. "Friend Ned," I said, "answer me frankly. Are you dull here? Do you regret the destiny that was thrown into the hands of... Ugh. Do you regret the destiny that has thrown you into the hands of Captain Nemo? The Canadian remained for some moments without answering. Then, crossing his arms, "Frankly," he said, "I don't regret this voyage under the seas. I shall be glad to have made it, but to have made it, it must come to an end. That is my opinion." "It will come to an end, Ned." "Where and when?" "I don't know where, and I can't say when, or rather, I suppose it will end when the seas have nothing further to teach us. All that begins has necessarily an end in this world." "I think like Monsieur," answered Conseil, "and it is quite possible that after going over all the seas of the globe, Captain Nemo will give us our discharge." "We have nothing to fear from the captain," I resumed. "But I am not of Conseil's opinion either. We are acquainted with the secrets of the Nautilus, and I have no hope that its commander, in order to set us at liberty, will resign himself to the idea of our taking them about the world with us." "Then what do you hope?" asked the Canadian. "That circumstances will happen of which we can and ought to take advantage, as well in 6 months' time as now." "Whew!" said Ned Land. "And where shall we be in 6 months, if you please, Mr. Naturalist?" "Perhaps here, perhaps in China. You know that the Nautilus is a quick sailor. It crosses oceans like a swallow in the air or an express on a continent. It does not fear frequented seas. How do we know that it will not rally around the coasts of France, England, or America, where we can attempt an escape as advantageously as here?" "Monsieur Arnaud," answered the Canadian, your premises are bad. You speak in the future tense. We shall be there, we shall be here. I speak in the present. We are here, and we must take advantage of it." I was closely hemmed in by Ned Land's logic, and felt myself beaten on that ground. I no longer knew what arguments to use. "Sir," Ned went on, "let us suppose, for the sake of argument, that Captain Nemo were to offer you your liberty today. Should you accept it?" "I do not know," I replied. "And if he were to add to that offer that he makes today, he would not renew later on, should you accept it?" And I did not answer. "And what do you think of it, friend Conseil?" asked Ned Land. "I have nothing to say. I am absolutely disinterested in the question. Like my master, I am a bachelor. No wife, relations, nor children expect my return. I am at Monsieur's service. I think like Monsieur. I say what Monsieur says, and you must not depend on me to make a majority. 2 persons are concerned. Monsieur on one side, Ned Land on the other. That said, I listen and am ready to count for either." I'm disturbing the chipmunks with my reading. I could not help smiling at Conseil's annihilate his... I could not help smiling at seeing Conseil annihilate his personality so completely. The Canadian must have been enchanted not to have him against him. "Then, sir," said Ned Land, "as Conseil does not exist, we have only to speak to each other, and I have spoken. You have heard me. What have you to answer?" It was evident that I must sum up, and subterfuges were repugnant to me. "Friend Ned," I said, "this is my answer. You are right, and I am wrong. We must not depend on Captain Nemo's goodwill. The commonest prudence forbids him to set us at liberty. On the other hand, prudence tells us that we must profit by the first opportunity of leaving the Nautilus." "Very well, Monsieur Arnaud. That is wisely spoken." "Only," I said, "I have but one observation to make. The occasion must be serious. Our first attempt must succeed, for if it fails, we shall not find another opportunity of attempting it again, and Captain Nemo would never forgive us." "That is true enough," answered the Canadian. "But your observation applies to every attempt at flight, whether it be in 2 years' time or 2 days' time. Therefore, the question still is the same. If a favorable opportunity occurs, we must seize it." "Agreed. And now, friend Ned, will you tell me what you mean by a favorable opportunity?" Well, for instance, a dark night when the Nautilus would only be a short distance from the European coast. Then you would attempt to escape by swimming. Yes, if it were sufficiently near the coast and the vessel were on the surface, but if we were too far off or if the vessel were underwater, and in that case? In that case, I should try to take possession of the boat. I know how it works. We would get into the interior of it, undo the bolts, and get up to the surface without even the helmsman seeing us. Well, Ned, look out for that opportunity, but do not forget that a failure would be fatal to us. I will not forget it, sir. And now, Ned, should you like to know what I think of your plan? Yes, Monsieur Arnaud. Well, I do not say I hope, that so favorable an opportunity will not occur. Why? Because Captain Nemo cannot be unaware that we have not renounced the hope of recovering our liberty, and we will keep watch above all in European seas. I am of Monsieur's opinion, said Conseil. We shall see, answered Ned Land, shaking his head in a determined manner. And now, Ned Land, I added, we must leave it there. Not another word on this subject. The day you are ready to inform us, we shall follow you. I leave it entirely to you. This conversation was destined to have such grave consequences later on. This conversation that was destined to have such grave consequences later on ended thus. I ought now to say that facts seemed to confirm my suspicions, to the Canadian's great despair. Did Captain Nemo distrust us in these frequented seas, or did he merely wish to keep out of sight of the numerous ships of all the nations that plough the Mediterranean? I do not know, but he generally kept under the water and at a good distance from land. When the Nautilus rose to the surface, nothing but the helmsman's cage emerged, and it went to great depths, for between the Grecian archipelago and Asia Minor, the sea is more than 20,000 yards deep. On the 14th of February, I resolved to spend some hours in studying the fish of the archipelago, for some motive or other, the panels remained hermetically closed. By taking the direction of the Nautilus, I saw that it was making towards the island of Crete. At the epoch I had embarked on board the Abraham Lincoln, that island had just revolted against the Turkish despotism. But what had become of the insurrection since I knew nothing, and Captain Nemo, cut off as he was from all communication with land, could not inform me. I therefore made no allusion to this event when in the evening I was alone with him in the saloon. Besides, he seemed taciturn and preoccupied. Then, contrary to his custom, he ordered the panels of the saloon to open, and going from one to the other, he attentively observed the mass of water, for what purpose I could not guess. And on my side I employed my time in studying the fish that passed before my eyes. I could not take my eyes off the wonders of the sea, when they were suddenly struck with an unexpected apparition. In the midst of the water, a man appeared, a diver wearing in his belt a leather purse. It was a living man, swimming vigorously, occasionally disappearing to take a breath from the surface, then plunging again immediately. I turned to Captain Nemo and exclaimed in an agitated voice, "A man! A shipwrecked man! He must be saved at any price!" The captain did not answer, but came and leaned on the window. The man had approached, with his face flattened against the glass, looking at us. To my profound stupefaction, Captain Nemo made a sign to him. The diver answered him with his hand, immediately went up again to the surface of the sea, and did not appear again. "Don't be uneasy," said the captain to me. "It is Nicholas of Cape Matapan, surnamed the Pesque. He is well known in all the Cyclades, a bold diver. Water is his element, and he lives in it more than on land, going constantly from one island to another, and even as far as Crete. Do you know him, Captain?" "Why not, Monsieur Arnaud?" That said, Captain Nemo went towards a piece of furniture placed near the left panel of the saloon. Near this piece of furniture I saw an iron safe, on the lid of which a brass plate with the initials of the Nautilus and its motto, Mobilis Immobile, upon it. At that moment the captain, without taking further notice of my presence, opened the piece of furniture, which contained a great number of ingots. They were ingots of gold. From whence came this precious metal that represented an enormous sum? Where did the captain get this gold, and what was he going to do with it? I did not speak a word. I looked. Captain Nemo took these ingots, one by one, and arranged them methodically in the safe, which he entirely filled. The safe was securely fastened, and the captain wrote an address on the lid in what must have been modern Greek characters. This done, Captain Nemo pressed a knob, the wire of which communicated to the quarters of the crew. 4 men appeared, and, not without some trouble, pushed the safe out of the saloon. Then I heard them pulling it up the iron staircase with pulleys. Then Captain Nemo turned to me. Did you speak, Professor? No, Captain. Then, sir, if you allow me, I will wish you a good night. Upon which Captain Nemo left the saloon. I went back to my room very curious. As may be believed, I tried in vain to sleep. I tried to find out what connection there could be between the diver and the safe filled with gold. I soon felt by its pitching and tossing that the Nautilus was back on the surface of the water. Then I heard a noise of steps on the platform. I understood that they were unloosening the boat and launching it to the sea. It struck for an instant against the side of the Nautilus, then the noise ceased. 2 hours afterwards, the same noise, the same movements were repeated. The boat, hoisted on board, was placed in its socket, and the Nautilus sank again underneath the waves. Thus, then, the gold had been sent to its address. To what point of the continent? Who was Captain Nemo's correspondent? The next day I related to Conseil and the Canadian the events of the preceding night, which had excited my curiosity to its highest pitch. My companions were no less surprised than I. But where does he find all that gold? Asked Ned Land. To that there was no possible answer. I went to the saloon after breakfast and began work. Until 5 p.m. I wrote out my notes. At that moment I felt extremely hot and was obliged to take off my garment of byssus, an incomprehensible fact, for we were not in the high altitudes, and besides, when the Nautilus was submerged, it ought to experience no elevation in temperature. I looked at the manometer. It indicated a depth of 60 feet, to which atmospheric heat cannot reach. I went on with my work, but the heat became intolerable. Can the vessel be on fire? I asked myself. I was going to leave the saloon when Captain Nemo entered. He approached the thermometer, corrected it, and said, 42 degrees. I feel it, Captain, I answered. And if the heat augments, we cannot bear it. The heat will not augment unless we choose. Then you can moderate it as you please? No, but I can get away from the focus that produces it. Then it is exterior. Certainly, we are floating in boiling water. Is that possible? I cried. Look! The panels opened, and I saw the sea entirely white around the Nautilus. A sulphurous smoke was curling against the waves that boiled like water in a copper. I placed my hand on the panes of glass, but the heat was so great that I was obliged to withdraw it. Where are we? I asked. Near the island of Santorin, Professor, replied the captain, and precisely in that channel that separates Ne Kamani and Palikamani. I wish to show you the curious spectacle of submarine eruption. I returned to the window. The Nautilus was no longer moving, and the heat was growing intolerable. Notwithstanding the saloon being hermetically closed, an unbearable sulphurous smell pervaded it, and I perceived scarlet flames, the brilliancy of which killed the electric light. I was in a bath of perspiration, choking and nearly broiled. We cannot remain any longer in this boiling water, I said to the captain. No, that would not be prudent, answered the unmoved Nemo. An order was given, the Nautilus tacked about, and left the furnace it could not with impunity set at defiance. A quarter of an hour later we were breathing on the surface of the waves. The thought then occurred to me that if Ned Land had chosen that part of the sea for our flight, we should not have come out of it alive. The next day, the 16th of February, we left this basin, and We left this basin, and we had cleared the Straits of Gibraltar by sunrise on the 18th. It was evident to me that this Mediterranean, enclosed by the countries which we wished to avoid, was distasteful to Captain Nemo. Its waves and breezes recalled too many memories, if not too many regrets. He had not here that liberty of movement, that independence of maneuver that he had in the open ocean, and his Nautilus was cramped between the shores of Africa and Europe. Our speed was now 25 miles an hour. It is useless to say that Ned Land, notwithstanding his great wish, was obliged to renounce his projects of flight. He could not use a boat that was being dragged along at a rate of 13 yards a second. To leave the Nautilus then would be like jumping out of a train going at the same speed, as imprudent as a thing as possible to be attempted. Besides, our apparatus only went up to the surface at night in order to renew its provision of air, and it was guided entirely by a compass and log. I therefore only saw the Mediterranean what passengers by an express see of the country that is flying before their eyes. That is to say, the distant horizon, and not the nearer objects which pass like a flash of lightning. However, Conseil and I could notice some of the Mediterranean fish, the power of whose fins would keep them for some moments in sight of the Nautilus. We lay in wait for them before the windows of the saloon. During the night of the 16th and 17th of February, we entered the second Mediterranean basin, the greatest depth of which are found at 1,500 fathoms. The Nautilus, under the action of its screw gliding over its inclined planes, sank into the lowest depths of the sea. There, instead of natural marvels, the mass of waters offered me many touching and terrible scenes. In fact, we were then crossing all that part of the Mediterranean so fertile in disasters. In that rapid course across the great depths, what wrecks I saw lying on the ground. Some already encrusted with coral, others simply covered with a layer of rust. Anchors, cannons, bullets, iron tackle, screws, pieces of engines, broken cylinders, crushed boilers, and hulls floating in mid-water, some upright, some overturned. Amongst these wrecks, some had been caused by collision. Others had been struck by some granite rock. I saw some that had sunk straight down with upright masts and the rigging stiffened by the water. They seemed to be at anchor at an immense roadway, only awaiting time for starting. When the Nautilus passed amongst them and enveloped them with its electric light, it seemed as if they would salute our vessel with their colors and give the orders. But no, nothing but the silence of death reigned in that field of catastrophes. I observed that the bottom of the Mediterranean was more encumbered with these wrecks as the Nautilus approached the Straits of Gibraltar. The coasts of Africa and Europe are nearer each other, and in the narrow space collisions are frequent. I saw there numerous iron keels, the fantastic ruins of steamers, some lying down, others upright, like formidable animals. One of these boats, with open sides, bent funnel, wheels which only the mounting remained, the helm separated from the stern post, and still held by an iron chain, its stern eaten away by the marine salts, presented a terrible spectacle. How many existences did this shipwreck destroy? How many victims swallowed up by the waves? Had any sailor on board survived to relate the terrible disaster, or did the waves still keep the fatal secret? Oh, what a fatal history would be that of the Mediterranean depths, this vast charnel house where so many riches have been lost, and so many victims have met their death. In the meantime, the Nautilus, indifferent and rapid, journeyed at full speed amidst these ruins. On the 18th of February, at about 3 a.m., it was at the entrance to the Straits of Gibraltar. It rushed rapidly through the narrow passage, and a few minutes later we were afloat on the waves of the Atlantic. Well, that was an interesting chapter. I didn't really expect it to be so appended that we just dove straight into the Mediterranean Sea. And then a lot of just being in the Mediterranean and being very nervous about Captain Nemo and his hang-ups. I'm sure he has them for a good reason, right? I'm sure we'll find out more about that in this much book. quite a mysterious man. Feel like we still don't know anything about him, except for the fact that he has a cool boat and he hates people, or he hates countries. Which, you know what? Kind of relatable. I love people. I don't care for the organization of countries, but people are pretty cool. If you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon, get in the comments, and tell us what you thought. If you like community action and being a part of a group of people instead of signing up after some kind of vague idea of a thing, get in the comments too. We love to hear from you guys, and you're a beautiful little community. But until next time, I'm going to leave you off here. We'll probably do another chapter pretty soon. I might even do another chapter out here because it's such a beautiful day. But you'll be seeing that one later, so just pretend that I changed clothes and the weather changed and this isn't all one recording. Because it's not. It's two recordings separated by months, probably months, right? But yeah, like, comment, subscribe, bell icon, comment, subscribe, bell icon, comment, and subscribe. Bye! Hi, YouTube. As you can see, it's still a beautiful day, and I'm still here. I don't know if these are going to be two separate videos, or if we're just going to mash them into one real long video. If you guys want to watch a real long video, we'll figure it out. This might get edited out in post, if I feel like doing it. Me later, if I left this in, put something funny like right here. That'll be the thumbnail. Maybe a little submarine. So yeah, we're back outside. We're going to be reading more of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'd say we're probably about 2/3 of the way through this. We're making pretty good time. Good book. Last we left off, Captain Nemo and the Nautilus dove underneath the land and got into the Mediterranean, which is pretty cool. Wild that they did that. They sailed through the Mediterranean for a while. Captain Nemo gave just an inordinate amount of gold in a safe to someone in the middle of the night. And yeah, they tried to boil the Nautilus for scientific observations, of course. Really interesting. We'll see if this chapter gives us more drama or more observations. Get in the comments if you like drama, or if you like observations, or if you like both. But yeah, so we're going to get back in here. It's going to be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Part 2, Chapter 6, Vigo Bay. The Atlantic, a magnificent plain, incessantly plowed by ships of all nations, sheltered under the flags of every nation, and terminated by the two terrible points dreaded by navigators, Cape Horn and the Cape of Tempests. The Nautilus was culling its waters under her sharp prow, after having accomplished nearly 10,000 leagues in 3 months and a half, a distance greater than one of the great circles of the earth. Where were we going now, and what had the future in store for us? The Nautilus, once out of the Straits of Gibraltar, came up to the surface again, and our daily walks on the platform were thus restored to us. I immediately went up there, accompanied by Ned Land and Conseil. At a distance of 12 miles, Cape Vincent, which forms the southwest point of the Spanish peninsula, was dimly to be seen. It was blowing a rather strong gale. The sea was rough, and it made the Nautilus rock violently. It was almost impossible to keep on the platform, which enormous seas washed at every moment. We therefore went down again after taking some mouthfuls of fresh air. I went back to my room, and Conseil returned to his cabin, but the Canadian, with a preoccupied air, followed me. Our rapid passage across the Mediterranean had prevented him from putting his projects into execution, and he did not hide his disappointment. When the door of my cabin was shut, he sat down and looked at me in silence. "Friend Ned," I said, "I understand you, but you have nothing to reproach yourself with. To have attempted to leave the Nautilus while it was going at that rate would have been madness." Ned Land answered nothing. His compressed lips and frowning brow indicated the violent possession that this fixed idea had been taken of his mind. "Well," said I, "we need not despair yet. We are going up the coast of Portugal. France and England are not far off, where we should easily find refuge. If the Nautilus, once out of the Straits of Gibraltar, had gone southward, it would have carried us towards those regions where land is wanting. I could share your uneasiness, but now we know that Captain Nemo does not avoid civilized seas, and in a few days I think we can act with some security. Ned Land looked at me more fixedly still, and at length he opened his lips. "It's for tonight," said he. I started. I must acknowledge I was a little prepared for this communication. I wanted to answer the Canadian, but words would not come. We agreed to wait for an opportunity," said Ned Land. "I have that opportunity. This night we shall only be a few miles off the Spanish coast. The night will be dark. I have your word, Monsieur Arnaud, and I depend upon you." As I still was silent, the Canadian rose, and coming nearer to me, said, "This evening at 9 o'clock. I've told Conseil. At that time Captain Nemo will be shut up in his room and probably in bed. Neither the engineers nor any of the crew can see us. Conseil and I will go to the central staircase. You, Monsieur Arnaud, must remain in the library not far off and await our signal. The oars, mast, and sail are in the boat, and I have even succeeded in putting some provisions in it. I procured a wrench to unscrew the bolts which fasten the boat to the hull of the Nautilus. Thus, everything is ready for tonight." "The sea is bad." "That I allow," answered the Canadian. "But we must risk that. Liberty is worth paying for. Besides, the boat is solid, and a few miles with the wind in our favor are not any consequence. Who knows if tomorrow we shall not be hundreds of leagues out? If circumstances favor us, we shall land, living or dead, on some point of solid ground between 10 and 11 o'clock. Then tonight, by the grace of God." Thereupon the Canadian withdrew, leaving me almost stunned. I had imagined that when the matter turned up I should have time to reflect and discuss it. My stubborn companion had not allowed me to do that, and after all, what could I have said to him? Ned Land was quite right. It was almost an occasion, and he took advantage of it. Could I take back my word and assume the responsibility of compromising by personal interest the future of my companion? Tomorrow Captain Nemo might carry us away from any land. At that moment, a rather strong hissing sound informed me that the reservoirs were being filled, and the Nautilus sank under the waves of the Atlantic. I remained in my room. I wished to avoid the captain in order to hide from his eyes the emotion I was laboring under. It was a sad day I passed thus between the desire to be free again and the regret of abandoning the marvelous Nautilus, leaving my submarine studies unfinished. To leave my ocean, my Atlantic, as I like to call it thus, without having observed its lowest strata or learnt from its secrets that the Indian seas and the Pacific had taught me. My romance had fallen from my hand while I was yet at the first volume. My dream was interrupted at its most delightful moment. What wretched hours passed thus, sometimes seeing myself safely on board with my companions, sometimes wishing, in spite of my reason, that some unforeseen circumstance would prevent the realization of Ned Land's projects. Twice I went into the saloon. I wished to consult the compass and to see the Nautilus was approaching or going farther away from the coast. But no, the Nautilus kept constantly in the Portuguese waters. It was making for north along the shores of the ocean. I was, therefore, obliged to make up my mind to it, and prepare for my flight. My baggage was not very heavy, and consisted of my notes, nothing more. I asked myself what Captain Nemo would think of our flight, what uneasiness it might cause him, what harm it might do to him, and what he would do in case it was discovered or it failed. Certainly I had no fault to find with him. On the contrary, hospitality was never given more freely than his. In leaving him, I could not be accused of ingratitude. No oath bound us to him. He counted upon the force of circumstance alone, and not upon our word, to keep us with him forever. But his intention, openly avowed, of keeping us eternally prisoners on board his vessel justified our attempts. I had not seen the captain again since our visit to the island of Santorin. Would chance bring me into his presence before our departure? I both desired and feared it might. I listened if I could hear him walking in the room next to mine. No noise reached my ear, and therefore could be no one in the room. Then I asked myself if the strange personage was on board at all. Silent since the night during which the boat had left the Nautilus on a mysterious mission, my ideas about him were slightly modified. I thought, whatever he might say about it, that Captain Nemo must have kept some sort of communication with land. Did he never leave the Nautilus? Entire weeks had passed without me having seen him. What was he doing during that time? Was he not far off accomplishing some secret act the nature of which had thus far escaped me? All of these ideas, and 1,000 more, assailed me at once. The field of conjectures could not be but infinite in our strange situation. I felt an insurmountable discomfort. That day of waiting seemed to me eternal. The hours struck too slowly for my impatience. My dinner was served as usual in my room. I ate little, being too much preoccupied. I left the table at 7 o'clock. 120 minutes, I counted them, still separated me from the time when I was to join Ned Land. My agitation then redoubled. My pulse beat violently, and I could not remain immovable. I walked about, hoping to calm the trouble in my mind by movement. The idea of failing in our bold enterprise was the least painful of my thoughts, but at the idea of seeing our project discovered before leaving the Nautilus, of being brought before Captain Nemo, irritated, or, what would be worse, saddened by my leaving him, my heart palpitated. I wished to see the saloon for the last time. I went by the waist, and then entered that museum where I had passed so many useful and agreeable hours. I looked at all of these riches and treasures like a man on the eve of eternal exile, and who was going to never return. These marvels of nature, these masterpieces of art, amongst which for so many days my life had been concentrated, I was going to leave them forever. I should have liked to look through the windows across the waters of the Atlantic, but the panels were hermetically shut, and an iron sheet separated me from the ocean which I did not know as yet. As I moved thus about the saloon, I reached at the door, let into the angle, which opened into the captain's room. To my great astonishment, the door was ajar. I drew back involuntarily. If Captain Nemo was in his room, he could see me. However, hearing no noise, I drew near it. The room was empty. I pushed open the door and entered. Still the same severe monk-like aspect. At that moment, some prints, hung up, that I had not noticed during my first visit, struck me. They were portraits of great historical men whose existence was but perpetual devotion to the great humane idea. What tie could exist between these heroic souls and the soul of Captain Nemo? Could I at least, from that assemblage of portraits, find out the mystery of his existence? Was he the champion of oppressed nations, the liberator of slaves? Had he figured in the social or political commotions of the century? Had he been one of the heroes of the terrible American War, a war lamentable but forever glorious? Suddenly, the clock struck 8. The first stroke awoke me to reality. I trembled as if some invisible eye could see me from the bottom of my thoughts, and I rushed out of the room. There I glanced at the compass. Our course was still north. The log indicated moderate speed, and the manometer a depth of about 60 feet. Circumstances, therefore, were favoring the Canadian's project. I went back to my room, and I clothed myself warmly in my sea boots, sealskin cap, and my vest of byssus lined with sealskin. I was ready. I waited. The vibration of the screw alone disturbed the profound silence that reigned the boat. I listened attentively. Would not a shout tell me all at once that Ned Land had been caught in his efforts to escape? A mortal dread took possession of me. I tried in vain to regain my sang-froid. At a few minutes to 9 o'clock, I put my ear against the captain's door. No sound. I left my room and went back to the saloon, which was insufficiently lit, but empty. I opened the door communicating with the library. The same insufficient light, the same solitude. I went and placed myself at the door that opened into the cage of the central staircase and awaited Ned Land's signal. At that moment, the vibration from the screws sensibly diminished, then ceased altogether. Why was this change made in the working of the Nautilus? Whether this halt was favorable to or against Ned Land's plans, I could not tell. In the silence, the silence was only broken by the beatings of my own heart. Suddenly, I felt a slight shock. I understood that the Nautilus had just stopped at the bottom of the ocean. My anxiety increased. The Canadian signal did not reach me. I wanted to go to Ned Land and beg him to put off his attempt. I felt that something was changed in our usual navigation. At that moment, the saloon door opened, and Captain Nemo appeared. He perceived me and said without further preamble, in an amiable tone, "Ah, Professor, I was looking for you. Do you know your Spanish history?" Anyone knowing the history of his own country thoroughly understood the same conditions of mental worry and anxiety, would not be able to quote a single word of it. "Well," continued Captain Nemo, "you heard my question. Do you know the history of Spain?" "Very badly," I replied. "That is like savants," said the captain. "They know nothing. Well, sit down," added he, "and I will relate a curious episode of that history to you." The captain stretched upon a divan, and I mechanically took a place beside him with my back to the light. "Professor," he said, "give me all of your attention. This history will interest you in some sort, for it will answer a question that doubtless you have not been able to solve." "I hear, Captain," said I, not knowing what my interlocutor was driving at, and wondering whether it had anything to do with our projects of flight. "Professor," resumed the captain, "if you have no objection, we will go as far back to 1702. As you know, your king, Louis some Roman numerals. Sorry, gang, I'm not going to worry about the Roman numerals. XIV. Get in the comments if you know what that is. King Louis, thinking that the gesture of a potentate was sufficient to make the Pyrenees sink into the ground, had imposed his grandson, the Duke of Anjou, on the Spaniards. This prince, who reigned more or less badly under the name of Philip V, I know that one, had a strong party against him from without. In fact, the year before, the royal houses of Holland, Austria, and England had concluded a treaty of allegiance at The Hague, for the aim of taking the crown of Spain from Philip V and placing it on the head of an archduke, to whom they gave a premature title of Charles III. Spain had this coalition to resist, but she was nearly destitute of soldiers and sailors. However, little bug landed on me. However, money would not be wanting, provided that their galleons, loaded with gold and silver from America, could enter her ports. Now, towards the end of 1702, she was expecting a rich envoy that France had sent, a fleet of 23 vessels, commanded by the Admiral Chateau Renaud, to escort, for the combined fleets were then scouring the Atlantic. This convoy was bound for Cadiz, but the admiral, having learnt that the English fleet was cruising in the neighborhood, resolved to make for a French port. The Spanish commanders of the convoy protested against this decision. They wished to be accompanied to a Spanish port, and if not to Cadiz, at Vigo Bay, situated on the northwest coast of Spain, which was not blockaded. The Admiral Chateau Renaud was weak enough to obey this injunction, and the galleons entered Vigo Bay. Unfortunately, this bay is an open roadstead that cannot be in the least defended. They were, therefore, obliged to hasten the unloading of the galleons before the arrival of the combined fleets, and there would have been plenty of time to do it in, but for a miserable question of rivalry that arose suddenly. "You are following these links of facts," said the captain. "Perfectly," said I, not knowing why I was receiving this lesson in history. "Then I continue. This is what happened. The merchants of Cadiz had a privilege by which they were to receive all the merchandise that came from the East Indies, and the landing of the ingots from the galleons at the port of Vigo was a contravention of their rights. They made complaints at Madrid and obtained from the feeble Philip V the order to make the convoy remain without unloading in the roadstead of Vigo until the enemy's fleet should be out of the road. Now, whilst this decision was being arrived at, on the 22nd of October, 1702, the English ships arrived in Vigo Bay. The Admiral Chateau Renaud, notwithstanding his inferior forces, fought courageously. But when he saw that the riches of the convoy were about to fall in the hands of the enemies, he burnt and scuttled the galleons that went to the bottom of this with their immense treasures. Captain Nemo stopped. I acknowledged that I did not perceive as of yet how his story could interest me. "Well?" I asked him. "Well, Monsieur Arnaud," answered Captain Nemo, "we are in Vigo Bay, and it rests with yourself whether you will penetrate into its mysteries." The captain rose and begged me to follow him. I had time to recover myself, and I obeyed. The saloon was dark, but across the transparent panes glittered the sea, and I looked. For a radius of half a mile around the Nautilus, the water seemed impregnated with electric light, the sandy bottom clear and distinct. Some of the crew, clothed in their bathing dresses, were at work emptying half-rotten casks, splintered cases, amidst still blackened spars. From these cases and casks escaped ingots of gold and silver, cascades of piastres and jewels. The sand was strewn with them. I don't know if you can hear, but someone's chicken is having a time out there. Oh, just mad about it. I know, I also want Captain Nemo's deep-sea Vigo Bay treasure, Mr. Chicken, but you don't have to complain so much about it. Sorry for the minor interruption for that chicken. Where was I? Then, loaded with their precious booty, these men returned to the Nautilus, deposited their load, and went back to continue their exhaustible haul of gold and silver fishery. I understood. It was a battlefield of I understood. It was the battlefield of the 22nd of October, 1702. In this very place the galleons laden from Spanish government had sunk. Here Captain Nemo came, according to his needs, to encase the millions with which he ballasted his Nautilus. It was for him, and for him alone, that America had given up her precious metals. He was the direct heir, without anyone to share, of these treasures taken from the Incas and Ferdinand Cortez's conquered people. "Did you know, Professor," he asked me, smiling, "that the sea contained such riches? I have only to pick up what men have lost, not only in this Vigo Bay, but in 1,000 other scenes of shipwreck, all marked on my marine chart. Now do you understand why I am so many times a millionaire?" "Yes, Captain, but allow me to tell you that in your work in Vigo Bay, you've only been beforehand with a rival company." "What company, pray?" "A company that has received from the Spanish government the privilege of seeking the shipwrecked galleons. Their shareholders are tempted by the bait of the enormous profit, for they estimate that the value of the shipwrecked treasures to be at around 500 million francs. 500 millions? Answered Captain Nemo. "They were that much, but are so no longer." "Just so," said I, "and a warning to the shareholders would be an act of charity. Who knows, however, if it would be received well? What speculators regret above all generally is less the loss of money than that of their insane hopes. I pity them, after all. Less than the thousands of unfortunates to whom so much wealth, well distributed, would have been profitable, whilst it is now ever lost to them." I had no sooner expressed this regret than I felt it must have wounded Captain Nemo. "Lost to them?" he answered, getting animated. "Do you think, then, that this wealth is lost when it is I that gather it? Do you think I give myself the trouble to pick up these treasures for myself? Who says that I do not make good use of them? Do you believe that I ignore the existence of suffering beings, of races oppressed in this world, of miserable creatures to solace, of victims to revenge? Do you not understand? Captain Nemo stopped, regretting perhaps having said so much. But I had guessed. Whatever might the motives whatever might be the motives that forced him to seek independence under the sea, he was still a man. His heart still beat for the sufferings of humanity, and his immense charity was given to the oppressed peoples, as well as to individuals. And then I understood to whom the millions were sent by Captain Nemo, while the Nautilus was cruising the waters of revolted Crete. And that is the end of, what was that, chapter 6? That was a good chapter. Alright, Captain Nemo, you shot an otter once, and I still don't forgive you for it. But if you are collecting shipwrecked treasures from the bottom of the ocean and giving it to the people who are being oppressed or mistreated, you're a good person in my book. Pretty sick. Pretty cool chapter. I'm curious to see what's gone on with Ned and Conseil. I'm a little... oh, goodness. Woodpecker just quite right up there. Isn't that something? Hold on, YouTube. You're getting a quick nature documentary. Where are you? There you are. Look at that, a little hairy woodpecker. I say little, but probably about the size of a, yeah, like a foot tall. That's a decent sized bird. But anyway, YouTube, that was Chapter 6 of Part 2 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. If you liked that, like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell icon. Get in the comments if you have any thoughts, opinions, funny jokes, anything that you can think of that we might have missed or that you want to see more of. Or if you just want to say hi, just leave a comment. We respond to basically everything that you guys put down there, so feel free to just wang stuff down there whenever. But that was a good chapter. Until next time, when I think we'll have another good chapter, I think it's time to sign off. So until next time, YouTube, just look at that beautiful, beautiful view. All right. Bye-bye.